ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਬਲ ਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਦਾ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਰਸ ਪਿੰਨੇ ਕੀਰਤਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜਿਆ। ਸੋ ਦਾਸ ਨੂੰ ਬੇਨਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੁਝ ਕੁ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਕਨਸੈਪਟਸ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਚਾਰੀਏ, ਤਾਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਫਿਰ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨਵੰਬਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 4 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਨਸੈਪਟਸ ਮੈਂ ਕੱਢੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਿਚਾਰਾਂਗੇ। ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੋਲਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ 'ਚ? ਮੇਰਾ ਜੀ ਕਰਦਾ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ 'ਚ ਬੋਲਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਸੌਖਾ ਆ। So I'm going to speak in English, and hopefully that most people can catch what we're going to be saying today. I'm going to record this as well, and hopefully we can broadcast it on some media, but that you don't need to worry about that. Let me worry about that. So I was told that we need to do some exploring and code. So really, what I've chosen, I've talked about key concepts, key Gurbani concepts here. And the key is quite a good metaphor, because Kunji is a way of unlocking, isn't it? So, and I think that in most schools of thought, there are about half a dozen key concepts in any academic discipline as well. If you go into economics or engineering, there's about 4 or 5 key concepts. In fact, there's a colleague of mine from Harvard University, Ralph Mayer, his name is, and he developed a whole theory which was called threshold concepts. And he said that human beings basically understand the world through language. Yeah? And within language, we have certain words are just for making sentences. But there are other concepts, words that really capture the meaning. They have the whole kind of essence of what the message is. It's not enough, because you've got to understand how these ideas connect together as well. But I think it's a good start to look at them individually. So this week we're going to be looking at the concept of Akaal Purakh. And I'm sure this is familiar to you all. I'm sure you've recited it, you've used that word, you've said that word many times throughout your life. And so next week we'll be looking at the concept of hukum. Hukum is another very important concept in Sikhi. And the week after we'll be looking at the concept, possibly the most significant concept in Sikhi, is the concept of Naam. And then in the 4th session, we'll be looking at the idea of Grist Jivan. It's another very important concept in Sikhi, which is probably more to do with the practical dimension of Sikhi, whereas these others, you can study them as philosophical ideas as well. So this is just with when you study anything, you have to have a methodology. If you're an engineer, you have to have a method to do your engineering, or a mechanic. Every building, you have a method. I suppose when we're exploring these kind of concepts, which you could argue are philosophical concepts, different people come to these from different perspectives. Yeah, and I just wanted to set out what my methodology is, because I think it's important that, in fact, partly what I'm going to say is that we understand the world through ourselves. So we need to be wary of what influences we have. So I'm a scholar, I'm an activist, which means that I'm not a scholar who sits in a dusty library somewhere, contemplates the world of the universe. I'm actually out in the kind of in the public, in society. And to some extent, I follow Guru Nanak's example there of being part of the struggle of life, rather than withdrawing from society to become enlightened. So I'm a scholar activist, and I understand history through both ideas, the interplay of ideas. In Gurbani, we might call that the nirgun, the unseen. Yeah, because ideas don't have any material existence, do they? Ek soch hundi na idea, it's a thought. You can't weigh an idea. But also the materiality of life, the fact that we are also physical beings. Yes, we perceive ourselves to be physical entities, and in Gurmat you might see that as the sargun, the visible, the seen, unseen, unseen. Yeah, and for me, our existence is the interplay between these 2 dimensions. Another way to think about it is that we make the world, but in some senses the world makes us as well. In philosophy we call that a dialectic relationship. One cannot be thought out without the other. And in Gurmat, I think this notion of Nirgun Sargun kind of brings that together. I also believe that each one of us is on a journey. And it's our journey, it's our journey. We're not in the same journey. And I'll say what I mean by that. And that we're all trying to appreciate or get some realization of our own existence, yeah? Some people might do that through worldly pleasures. Other people will do it through contemplation. Other people might do it through doing active seva, service, or, I don't know, artists do it through creative, making things, paintings, music, whatever. So I think that all of us, whether you are believers or not believers, religious, not believers, we're all seeking a meaning in our lives, yeah? What is the purpose of life? In some senses, once you've lost that sense of purpose, it's dangerous for you because you have no sense to live, yeah? And that's often associated with some kind of mental illness. So it's a journey. And in some senses, we're looking for something that is transcendent, that is divine, yeah? Some people will call that God, they'll give us certain names. Other people will give it other descriptors. But we're all looking for that. And that means that what I say is not the truth. I always say that, each one of us have to discover our own relationship with the divine, however we perceive that. For me, in Gurbani, it talks about Pritam, our Pritam, Sada Pritam, Pyara Pritam. And that means lover. Pritam means Priti undi pyar karna, love karna. And in some senses, our relationship with our Pritam is uniquely ours. And that's why I think in Sikhi, we can sit together in Sangat, but our relationship has got to be ours. We can't simply say, I've come into the Sangat, now my relationship has been concealed with the Pyara, because it's a personal relationship. And jida marga joto prem khelan ka chao, sirta tali gali mere aao. So there is a condition. If you want to really, build a pyar with that divine entity, then you kind of have to give up yourself, or you have to give up a lot of yourself. Sirta tali, that means you have to give up your own ego, because you have to allow space for that and to enter your consciousness. And a lot of Gurbani talks about that. I also want to, in terms of my approach to Gurbani, Gurbani for me does not seek to provide factual or scientific or mythological truths and accounts, yeah? And some people say, oh, Gurbani is scientific. I think that's a really misunderstanding of what Gurbani is for. It's a form of poetry, but it's adorned by tuns and ragas, what you might call beats and rhythms and music, yeah? So it's poetry, it's words. And if you know anything about poetry, you'll know that what the beauty of poetry is. It can take 10,000 words and capture them in a few words. This is what poetry does. This is what Shabad does. It takes a huge amount and puts it into this beautiful, curated form. The downside of that is that because there's not a lot of detail there, you might have a detail in a dictionary or in a book, specifications. The downside is that you have to find the detail for yourself. Does that make sense? So in reading Gurbani is an invocation, it's not an instruction manual. If it was, it needs to be much more detailed. It's actually an invitation for you to go into yourself and to come out of yourself as well, to raise our consciousness and to maybe understand our purpose. And here I'm quite influenced by, I don't know if any of you done philosophy or sociology, but there's a very important scholar called Friedrich Hegel. He was a German scholar, philosopher. He's probably the most significant philosopher of the European Enlightenment. And he's significant because if you remember what happened in Europe, there was this movement away from religion towards secularization. The power of the church, the clergy was waning. And republicanism, the French Revolution, and even the elites were kind of losing their status because the elites often use the church to reinforce their own power. And in some senses, Guru Nanak is also engaged in a similar process in terms of what's happening in Punjab and in that part of the world. But Hegel was trying to bridge the two in his philosophy. He was trying to bridge this notion of the otherworldliness, yeah, the kind of traditional view of religion as being this kind of cosmic other plane, but also the lived realities that we live in. And Hegel, it was called what's called German idealism. And I'm mentioning this because I'm going, as I say, I'm going to mention that a very famous Sikh scholar, Professor Puran Singh, and I'll quote him later on, who also studied Hegel and was immensely influenced by Hegel. And I think some of the Singh Sabha scholars as well saw in German idealism elements of Sikhi as well. Now, that doesn't mean that we have submitted to the European Enlightenment. This is the mistake. Because some people say, Singh Sabha ਦੇ scholar ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਇਹ ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਗਏ ਤਾਂ ਆਪ ਅਪਣਾ ਲਿਆ. Actually, what they were doing is they were seeing what these people were talking about. Guru Nanak's already talked about it, yeah? So they weren't affirming what Guru Nanak was teaching, but quite the opposite. They were saying to them, you people have come to these ideas, but actually Gurmat goes even deeper and even further. And what Hegel said was, he says, nothing exists without the mind. Think about that. Think about your five senses. The world only exists for you because you have five senses. If you, so those are five senses, your eye, your sight, ears, touch, smell, and taste, yeah? If you switched off those senses, in some senses, the world would cease to exist, yeah? It would just exist in your head. Well, Hegel said that's what it is in effect. The world out there is really inside our mind. Yeah, we think it's out there, but it's inside because we're receiving these symbols. So in that sense, our knowledge about the world is limited to our experience. Yeah, we cannot know all the world because we cannot experience all of the world. And even if we can in a moment in time, we can't experience it for the rest of history. Yeah. So that's important. So even if we perceive it not to be the case, actually our reality is our own in our head. Can you accept that? That our reality is in our brains? Yeah? We might perceive that, I mean, you perceive me to be sat here now, but actually I'm not sat here, I'm just a chemical reaction in your brain, an electrical impulse in your brain. Now, you might think, what's that to do with Gurmat? I'm going to just share a couple of shouts on the screen. It might be difficult to read. And Gurbani says something very similar. Bhagat Pipa Ji, there's a Shabad from Pipa Ji. He was a king of Bengal, I think, Pipa. There's one Shabad by him. And it's really profound Shabad. He says, Kayo Deva, Kayo Deval, Kayo Jangam Jati. In the body, the divine is present. The body is his temple. In the body is the place of pilgrimage, of which I'm a pilgrim. So he's going back to the body, back to the body. Kayo tup deep nibeda, kayo pujo pati. In the body is the incense, earth and lamps and oblation. In the body is the leaf offering. Now what he's doing is he's talking about the way in which religion was practiced, where it was all externalized, the rituals and all these objects. And what the people I sent, all of these things are inside you. Very interesting. Na kach aibo, na kach jaibo, Ram ki dohai rahao. Since I have invoked the mercy of the divine, there is no coming nor going. So he's even rejected this idea of life and death, which was one of the major kind of planks of Vedantic philosophy, the idea that we go into these cycles of life and death. Na kach aibo, na kach jaibo. And this last he said, Jo Brahmande, Soi Pinde, Jo Khoje Sopai. He who is in the universe that also abides in the body. And whoever seeks, he finds him there. Pipa Pranve Param Tat hai Satgur Hoye Likhave. Jo Brahmande Soi Pinde. So the whole universe is inside you. Okay? Which is very similar to what Hegel's saying, but for me, this is a much more expansive concept. Guru Ramdas ji vi kende ne, ਇਹ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਗੌੜੀ ਰਾਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ in the body it says kaya ਕੋਟ ਅਪਾਰ ਹੈ ਅੰਦਰ ਹਟਨਾਲੇ. The human body is the fortress, and it goes further. He says in that fort are all these shops ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਾਜ਼ਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ. It's saying they're inside you. Kaya ਕੋਟ ਅਪਾਰ ਹੈ. It's a grand fort. Andar hatnale gurmukh sauda jo kare har vast samale. The Gurmukh who comes to trade takes care of the cargo of the God's name. Okay, so they've created the inner body as like a marketplace in which you can do trade. And here he's talking about trading in the name. No nidan har vanjiye hire parwale. We should pursue the treasure of the true jewels. No nidan nidiyan. Again, inside yourself. When kaya je hor the tan khojde se mood betale. Those who search for riches outside of the body are foolish devils. Se ujjad param paye hai, pavaiye jo chad mirg pale. So they just wander in this wilderness like the deer who searches for the musk in the bushes. So again, this emphasis on the treasures inside yourself, okay, and the futility of looking outside of yourself. So I'll come back to this because I just wanted to. This is where we're coming from. So Akaal Purakh, 2 words. Akaal ta Purakh. Actually, Akaal is made up of 2 words as well. It's made up of a and Kal. Kal kiya, Kal is time. Yeah, it's the word for time, and it goes back to Sanskrit. Kal means time. So when we say Akaal in Punjabi and Gurbani, when you put the in front of it, it reverses the meaning, yeah? It's like switches the polarity, if you like. It turns it into timelessness. Okay, so Kal is time, Akaal is timeless, yeah? Or not bound in time, timeless. And Khan Singh Nabha gives a definition as well. It says, Akaal da definition, jo avinashi hai. So that thing that never is infinite, cannot be destroyed, avinash nahi hota. Jista kade naal kaal nahi hai, which never runs out of time, yeah? It's beyond time. It's ate jis de kaal samay di koi asar nahi hai. So that thing that is timeless is not impacted by time, yeah? Gets quite abstract now, doesn't it? What is Purakh? Purakh comes from the Sanskrit, in Sanskrit called Pursha. ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਮਹਾਪੁਰਸ਼ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਜਾਂ ਇਹ ਮਹਾਪੁਰਖ ਆ. Actually, it's more complex than that. It has roots in the Vedic and the Upanishadic texts. And it means cosmic being within the Vedic tradition, or a self-aware entity. A Purush is something that is self-aware. So in that sense, I suppose you could say that the Purush would be a Brahmgyani, yeah? But we've now turned that word into a person, a Purush Janda. But originally, it was somebody who was exalted, somebody who, in some senses, was self-aware. So Akaal Purakh is the timeless, self-aware entity. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay, good stuff. And of course, we often associate Akaal Purakh with Akaal Murth. Akaal Murtha Junni Sevan. Well, I think we need to understand that relationship as well. So Murtha ki hundi hai, Murti picture, like a shape, a representation of something, yeah? And Akaal Murth then, again, is because Akaal is timeless, formless, and therefore the picture of the timeless, formless has got itself to be beyond space and time. It can't be physical. Yeah? Akaal Murth cannot be physical because it's timeless. And it exists in many dimensions. Yeah? So there's a problem here, isn't there? Because if we see this as Akaal Purakh as being Akaal Murth, as being this timeless, something that exists in many dimensions, it seems a bit abstract, doesn't it? It seems a bit remote. It seems like, how could you build a loving relationship with something that seems so abstract? How can we relate to Akaal Purakh, which taken in this way seems to be completely and utterly beyond our imagination? That's the challenge. So how can we bridge that? And that's a really important question. For that, we need to just explore a bit more about what is time, because time itself is a very slippery idea. Akaal, we use it all. What time is it? And we look at our watch and we say it's 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock. So what if your watch has stopped? Does it mean that the time is at the time at which it stopped or not? So what governs time? So one of the ways in which we think about time is this linear progression, yeah? And this very much is linked to the Abrahamic worldviews that, and they talk about the earth being created on a certain time and then it took so many days or years, yeah? And then there's going to be an end of times. In the Bible, in the Abrahamic, they talk about the end of times, Armageddon, yeah? There was a beginning and end. It's a very linear kind of idea. Within the Eastern tradition, it tends to be more cyclical, whether it's Buddhist or Hindu traditions. We can explore the Sikh tradition, but I think this is another big mistake that we make is we either present Sikhi as this monotheistic kind of Abrahamic tradition, or alternatively we present it as the kind of Vedantic kind of cyclical tradition. Well, if it's any one of those, then it has nothing unique about it. But actually, Sikhi is neither of those traditions, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Anybody studied Einstein's theory of relativity? Well, I mean, Einstein's theory says that there's this notion of time dilation, that time is associated with movement, yeah? Time, and there's a relationship between the speed of light and time. And they've done studies in this. So if you're traveling, the faster you go in relation to somebody else, your time changes in relation to somebody else. So that suggests that time isn't something that we all share. It's personal time, yeah? That's what Einstein, and they've done experiments to show that how if you get on an airplane traveling one side of the world and somebody's traveling this, their times actually change. So when they're at the point which they meet, they've got a different, and of course, taken to the extreme, and Einstein proved that if you get to the point of the speed of light, I don't know what whatever that number is, time stands still. Yeah, it's been proven. That's called the kind of singularity movement, and that's mind-boggling in itself. That sense of timelessness, where you get to the speed of light. Another one is this notion of entropy. That in the beginning there was nothing, yeah. And so when there was nothing, there was no diversity, there was no chaos, there was total order. In fact, there was so much order, there was nothing there to disorder. Take it. But once the time begins, it can only advance according to entropy, which is increasing disorder. And therefore, what this theory says is that time only has a forward motion. We sometimes talk about, can you travel back into time? Yeah, time travel. Well, the theory of time and chaos or entropy would suggest that you can only go forward. Think of it like this. Have you ever seen a bottle breaking and shattering into pieces? Hands up if you've seen that. Have you ever broken your plates? I'm sure some people even thrown plates, but we won't go down there. Have you ever seen a bottle that's smashed coming back together? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen the garden or the living room tidy itself? It seems to get untidy by itself, but it doesn't tidy itself, does it? You have to do something. So what the theory says is that as time progresses, chaos increases. And there's some suggestion that, if you think about the beginning of time, the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, there was only one element. What was that? And it's got number one. Come on, you chemists. Hydrogen. That was the only element in the universe. But with the kind of, as time moved on, you have more and more elements, more and more, and then somewhere down the line, human beings and complex organisms appear, yeah? So that's this notion of entropy, that time is linked to chaos. This is quite interesting because you could then say then timelessness could be a state of non-chaos. And I don't know how you interpret that, yeah? Maybe in Barney we talk about dubda, dualities, and always constantly being trapped in dualities. Maybe timelessness is where you kind of escape the dualities. You get to some kind of simple existence. And then the psychological time, this idea that we perceive time differently, yeah? And I don't know about you, but I remember this one side of this car accident where this car came up and hit me in the back. And my car spun really violently. And I'm not lying, in that, and that must have only been 2 seconds, 3 seconds. It's almost as if the whole of my life, like a video played in front of me. Have you ever experienced that sensation that so much is happening in such a short period of time? And that is because so much is happening, because your own brain processes time differently. These people who are really good at, say, football or cricket, or it could be anything, who use their reflex tennis, their brain, they almost slow down time in order to be able to do those things. I mean, tabla players, I mean, some of the tabla, when they play that, it's like they play, I don't know, 500 beats in a matter of seconds, and that's because they can slow down time and they can still think. So that's psychological time as well. We all perceive time differently. I want to talk about, sometimes we talk about now, don't we? The present time, the present moment. Have you used that phrase, the present moment? It's an interesting idea. And if you look at that picture, you've got the past, you've got the now or the present and the future. Yeah? And Gurbani talks about that, jo vartaman hai, pavik vartaman ityas. Yeah? The past, the vartaman, pavik. Let's just do a mind experiment. Does the past, does yesterday exist? You had a meal yesterday, yes? Does that exist now? Does it exist? Does what happened a week ago exist now? Anybody? It's gone, yeah? Those thoughts, those actions, those experiences have gone. So you can, just thinking about that, we can say the past doesn't exist because it's in the past. By definition, it's in the past. What about the future? What you're going to do tomorrow, does that exist now? Does it exist now, or what are you going to do in 6 months? You might plan for that, but does the actual thing exist? No, yeah? So can we agree that the only thing that exists is the present moment? So the question for me is, how long is the present moment? How long is it? Is it a minute? Because if it's a minute, you could say that, after 30 seconds, part of that minute's in the past. Is it a second? Because you can divide a second into two. Actually, the present moment is infinite divisions of time. And when you divide any number by infinity, what do you get? Anybody? Come on, some of you. Any number by infinity results in zero. Do it on your calculator if you want. Ask Google to do the calculation. It's zero. So how long is the present moment? Zero. So actually, if we could live in the present, we could be living in timelessness. Does that make sense? But we're too busy thinking about the past and the future. And that's all that we do, isn't it? Think about kal ki hoya, kalu ki hona. Somehow we can't fix ourselves in the present. And maybe that's that point of timelessness that Gurbani talks about. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸੁਰਤੀ ਜੁੜ ਜਵੇ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੀ ਸੁਰਤੀ ਜੁੜ ਜਵੇ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਦਾ ਫਿਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ when he doesn't think what happened yesterday or what's happening tomorrow, they're just in the moment. Okay, I'm running out of time. Actually, if you look at different religions, faiths, they all have concepts of timelessness. Although, as I'm going to argue, Sikhi has a unique concept. So Islam, Christianity, they all talk about God, Allah, Yahweh, being eternal and timeless. Although eternal and timeless aren't the same, but we'll just leave it there. We haven't got time to explore that. In Hinduism and various beliefs, they emphasize the idea of timeless, unchanging reality called Brahma. That's beyond the cycle of birth and death and rebirth. And that's why they say that we are trapped in the cycle of birth and death. Brahma is outside of that cycle, yeah? They're timeless, we are in time. And according to the Brahmanical view, is our time in this life is to break free from this cycle of time circles to go into this timelessness. Buddhism teaches that everything is in time, it's impermanent, and that the only thing that is permanent is timelessness. And therefore, our aim is to get to that point, and they call that nirvana. Yeah. In nirvana, there's no watches or clocks or iPhones. It's just this state of bliss, if you like. But what about Sikhi? Where does Sikhi fit into these? Certainly, we recognize the past, present, and future. But we go beyond time, both as a reality, but also as a metaphor. Okay? Remember when I started, that existence is about ideas, your thoughts, and the physical existence, yeah? And I'm going to argue Sikhi, both in the way we think about time, but also how we then use this idea of time to live our lives as a metaphor of timelessness is completely different to these ideas. And I'm not going to use my brain to make this argument. I use Gurbani. So ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆਦ ਸੱਚ ਜੁਗਾਦ ਸੱਚ ਹਾਂਜੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਸੱਚ ਨਾਨਕ ਹੋਸੀ ਵੀ ਸੱਚ ਆਦ ਸੱਚ in the beginning ਸੱਚ ਸੀ ਸੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਵੀ ਆ ਅੱਗੇ ਵੀ ਸੱਚ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਪਰ ਇੱਥੇ timeless ਸੱਚ ਹੈਗਾ this timeless reality. Yeah. So that truth is always there. Even before time it was. That's an important jugad touch. Jugga to bhi pehla. Because in the Vedanta, everything begins with the jugs. So Guru Nanak ne कहता है ऐसे jugga to pehla bhi परमात्मा सगा. ठीक है? पर वो timeless सगा. एक कभाव है कि सब होए. From one point, some call that the quantum singularity. ਤੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਪਸਾਓ ਇੱਕੋ ਕਵਾਓ ਤਿਸਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਲਖਤਰੀਆ. The whole universe exploded from this one source of energy, this singularity, that point of timelessness. Okay, Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Guru Bani also says quite a lot about the beginning of time and space and its connection. Maharaj ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਏਕ ਰੂਪ ਸਗਲੋ ਪਸਾਰਾ. Again, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਪਸਾਓ ਇੱਕੋ ਕਵਾਓ ਇੱਕ ਰੂਪ ਚੋਂ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਪਸਾਰਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ. ਆਪਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਬਲਿਹਾਰੀ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਵਸਿਆ ਤੇਰਾ ਅੰਤ ਨਾ ਜਾਈ ਲਖਿਆ. ਉਹ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਵਸ ਗਿਆ ਤੇਰਾ ਅੰਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. ਸੋ ਅੰਤ is another way to think about timelessness. Yeah? ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੇਅੰਤ ਹੋਵੇ ਕੋਈ ਸਮੇਂ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਅੰਤ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਹੁੰਦਾ. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਅੰਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ that thing that never vanishes, dissipates, is timeless. ਕੁਦਰਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਵਸਿਆ ਸੋਏ ਵਕਤ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਸੋ ਬੰਦਾ ਹੋਏ. ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਕਰਕੇ ਵਸਿਆ ਸੋਏ. ਹੁਕਮ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਹੁਕਮ ਨਿਯਮ ਲਾਜ਼ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਜੋ ਬਣਿਆ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਾਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਇਹ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਨੇ ਬਣਾਇਆ. ਠੀਕ ਆ. ਫਿਰ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਨੇ ਵਕਤ ਵਿਚਾਰੇ ਸੋ ਬੰਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਸ ਗਿਆ. ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਅਸਲੀ ਬੰਦਾ ਉਹੀ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਲਵੇ. ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਰਿਲੀਜੀਅਸ ਜਾਂ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟੀਕਲ ਜੀਵਨ ਆ is to be able to try to live moments in your life where you can appreciate that sense of timelessness. ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ if you get in that moment. ਮਾਲਕ ਆਪੀ ਨੇ ਆਪ ਸਾਜਿਓ ਆਪੀ ਨੇ ਰਚਿਓ ਨਾਉ ਦੁਈ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਸਾਜੀਐ ਕਰਿਆ ਸੰਡਿਠੋ ਚਾਉ. So here you can interpret that both as a physical thing, almost a cosmological thing that Paramatma self-created himself, and something that is timeless can continuously create themselves, yeah, because they're timeless. And then when Kudrat sajya fe kaal saj leta, then time and entropy and all those things come. But you can also see that within yourself, in your own, ਜਦੋਂ ਰੱਬ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੱਜ ਗਿਆ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਫਿਰ ਜੇ ਰੱਬ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਗਏ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਕਰਕੇ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਫਿਕਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਐਂਡ ਵੈਨ ਯੂ ਗੈਟ ਟੂ ਦੈਟ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਆਫ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲ ਕੌਨਸ਼ੀਅਸਨੈਸ ਫਿਰ ਜੰਮਣਾ ਮਰਨ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਫਿਕਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ. ਦੈਨ ਯੂ ਆਰ ਆਊਟ ਬਿਕਾਜ਼ ਯੂ ਆਰ ਆਊਟ ਆਫ ਟਾਈਮ. In fact, Gurbani talks quite a lot about that as a metaphor. Cycles of creation, birth and dissolution, death, evolution, origins, directions, goal, purpose. This is all another way in which we can think about timelessness as evolutionary. This notion of the center of the black hole, the point of singularity where time and space becomes still, yeah? ਇਹਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੁੰਨ ਸਮਾਧੀ, ਇਹ ਸਮਾਧੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ। ਜਦੋਂ ਸਮਾਧੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁੰਨ ਸਮਾਧੀ ਆਦਿ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਕਹੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਸਮਾਧੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, but it's also saying to us, if we can get into that consciousness of being still, remember what we said, where there is time there is motion, so you could say where there's stillness you can freeze time. Now obviously we can't, the yogis tried it, yogiyan da hi kam sakha, we can't do that, oh saab hi kachna lage, but we can contemplate that, tikna, still hona. So just going to quickly, couple of more minutes and then we'll have some questions and answers. Roop na rek na rang kish, tre gun te prab pin. ਉਹ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਰੂਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਕੋਈ ਸ਼ੇਪ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕੋਈ ਰੰਗ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਤੇ ਇਹ ਤ੍ਰੈ ਗੁਣ ਤਮੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਸਤੋ ਤਾਂ ਰਜੋ, ਇਹ ਤਿੰਨ ਗੁਣਾ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਫ੍ਰੀ ਆ ਮਾਇਆ ਤੋਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮਾਇਆ ਵੀ ਮਟੀਰੀਅਲਿਜ਼ਮ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਨਾ। So Paramatma is free from materialism, from those three desires, if you like. And again, we can use that as a metaphor for trying being like that ourselves, yeah? So the qualities of Paramatma, the qualities of the Akaal, the qualities of timelessness are metaphorical in the way in which we might use them. That's why they use in poetry as well, because poetry deploys metaphors to teach us lessons. So ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ, ਅਸਲ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਰ ਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਉਹ ਮੂਲ ਮੰਤਰ ਹੈ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਤੇ ਢਾਲਣਾ, ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਬਣ ਜਾਵਾਂ, ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਨਿਰਭਉ ਨਿਰਵੈਰ ਬਣ ਜਾਵਾਂ, ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਮੂਰਤ ਬਣ ਜਾਵਾਂ, ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਓਂਕਾਰ ਬਣ ਜਾਵਾਂ। ਸਮਝੀ ਗੱਲ? That's why you take this, what might be seen to be a concept that's about the universe and cosmology, into your own existence. ਗੁਰ ਕੀ ਮੂਰਤ ਮਨ ਮੈਂ ਧਿਆਨ, ਗੁਰ ਕੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਮੰਤਰ ਮਨ ਮਾਨ। ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਸਕਦੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਕਾਲ ਮੂਰਤ ਆ, ਉਹਦੀ ਪਿਕਚਰ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ, ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦੀ ਮੂਰਤ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਣਾਉਣੀ ਆ? ਗੁਰ ਕੀ ਮੂਰਤ ਮਨ ਮੈਂ ਧਿਆਨ। ਸੋ ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਮੂਰਤ ਬਣਾ ਲਈ, ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਮਝ ਲਓ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਨੂੰ ਰਿਜੈਕਟ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੂੰ ਬੰਨ੍ਹ ਲਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਪਿਕਚਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। But when you can create that image of Akaal Purakh within your mind, now of course if you're just reflecting the image that you've seen of Soba Singh, then that's not really the, and in some sense it's an image without an image, okay? Because the Shabad is not an image. And then ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਹੁਣ ਸਮਾਂ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸ਼ਬਦ ਮਰੋ ਫਿਰ ਜੀਵ ਹੋ ਸਾਧੀ। ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਜੀਵੋ ਸਾਧੀ ਕੀ ਆ? ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਹੋਗਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਦਾ ਲਈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜੀਵੋ। ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਗਏ ਨਾ, ਸ਼ਬਦ ਮਰੋ, ਮਰਨਾ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਤੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਾਲ ਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਗਏ, ਮਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਦਾ ਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਫਿਰ ਜੀਵੋ ਸਾਧੀ, ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਮਰਨ ਨਾ ਜਾਏ। ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਦੱਸੋ, ਜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨੇ ਕਹਿ ਤਾ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜ ਗਏ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਸਦਾ, ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡਾ ਜੰਮਣਾ ਮਰਨ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕੰਮ ਆ? ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਨਰਕਾਂ ਜਾਣਾ, ਇਹਨੇ ਸਵਰਗਾਂ ਜਾਣਾ, ਇੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਮਰਨ ਨਾ ਜਾਏ। ਉਹ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਕਾਲ ਪੁਰਖ ਨਰਕ ਸਵਰਗ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਆ। ਕਿਆ ਨਰਕ ਸਵਰਗ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਸੰਤਨ ਦੋ ਰੱਦ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪਹੁੰਚ ਗਏ ਉਹਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਰੱਦ ਕਰਤਾ। ਮਨ ਤੂੰ ਜੋਤ ਸਰੂਪ ਹੈ ਆਪਣਾ ਮੂਲ ਪਛਾਣ। ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਗਈ ਗੱਲ, ਮਨ ਹਰ ਜੀ ਤੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੈ, ਗੁਰਮਤੀ ਰੰਗ ਮਾਨ। ਉਹ ਰੱਬ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਆ, ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਅੰਦਰ ਆ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਬਦ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਨਾ ਹੀ ਇੱਕ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸਨੈਸ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਸੋ ਜਸਟ ਵਨ ਲਾਸਟ, ਮੈਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰ ਪੂਰਨ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ ਨਾ, ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਾਫੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਟੱਡੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਐਂਡ ਆਈ ਜਸਟ ਗੋਇੰ ਟੂ ਰੀਡ ਫਰਮ ਵਨ ਆਫ ਹਿਜ਼ very well-known books, The Spirit of the Sikh, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion. And he says, at the moment we annihilate time and the duration of time. So he says that, at the point at which we destroy time for ourselves, we are no longer in time, but time, or rather eternity itself, the timeless is in us. ਫਿਰ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ। The eternal world is no longer an object for us, but is lost in us. ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜੋ ਬ੍ਰਹਮੰਡੇ ਸੋਈ ਪਿੰਡੇ, ਜੋ ਖੋਜੇ ਸੋ ਪਾਈ। The Guru's mode of Simran, the coming in of inspiration of the spiritual worlds, has proven its wonderful efficiency for the seeker of this kind of spiritual development. The Sikh martyrs show the invincible spirit of gladness in the worst afflictions. So he's saying, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ methodologies ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ, ਭਗਤੀ ਕਰਨੀ, ਸਿਮਰਨ ਕਰਨਾ, ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਨੀ, this is the way that we can get into that sense of timelessness. But it does mean that when we engage in those practices, we should try to forget everything else. Not forever, but just for that moment. And when you do, then you're in the moment. And that's what then will give you that development to be able to then deal with the world around you, because you no longer then see that as determining your life. Yeah? In some senses, you see you as determining your life rather than the world determining you. So, Paul Chuk maaf karni, Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh. So, open for questions. Anybody would like to share a thought or tell me that I'm crazy and I need to get some professional advice. Andy, can you take this mic so we can? Here you are. Just go down to VG on there. Andy, this is recording so that we can then edit that in. Andy.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said about time, the past and the future. So the only thing logically you can do is what you can do now. So if you want to get to, I don't know, New York, you can get in a plane. If you want to get there faster, you get in a, faster flight. So it basically, I think with Sikhi, it kind of comes down to logic. Basically what is in your control is only the present, because you can't control what's happened in the past, and to a large extent you can influence maybe what's going to happen tomorrow, but you can maybe influence it by what you do now.
I think you use the word logic there, and it's one word that we see, people Sikhi logically are. Sikhi's logic is full of reason. Logic has its limits. Where there's love, you can't use logic to create love. You think many relationships would last if there was a formula that was used to say, well, let's do a. Maybe you should ask ChatGPT how to create love between each other. Do you think it would work? Because ChatGPT would use pure logic. It wouldn't work, yeah? So actually, logic is created in time as well. The laws of nature are created in time, causal relationships. But timelessness takes you outside of that space as well. So but we also recognize that we are governed by those laws as well. But our job is to transcend those laws if we can. And that's where that love comes in. Breathe, Bonnie. Anybody else? Hanji, Raj. Could you give the mic to Raj, yeah. Don't call me a googly, Raj. I know you've got one ready. Go on.
Thank you, Vaisab. You unpicked singularity and those sort of notions of the universe and time, which is very interesting. But I thought towards the end you just kind of skipped, to my mind, over the most important thing was really, and it almost, and I invite your comments, was kind of like mindfulness, that you should focus on what you're doing here and now. So when you're doing seva, you should be focusing on that seva and blocking everything else. Am I correct in understanding? Is that what the essence of what you said was?
No. This is one of the ways in which we often try to fit Sikhi into other ideologies. Yeah, in some senses, some Buddhist practices, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to empty the mind. Yeah, so the idea that I think manu khali kar lunge, then we can see our true self. Yeah. In Gurbani, it talks about the diwar of the 5 egos, panj chor. But it doesn't say that we destroy those. It says that we have to develop the ability to harness those. Okay? So we're not emptying ourselves, we're training ourselves. The end point might be the same, yeah? That's the first thing. The second thing is that so Simran is not a moment of like just mindfulness, because I think there's a closeness between mindlessness and mindfulness. In Sikhi, Gyan is really important. Knowledge is important, but we also have to be able to distinguish between Gyan and Agyan. So we have to have that sharpness. And ite खोज करनी बहुत जरूरी है. The intellect is important. We don't deny the intellect, but we also know that the intellect itself is, it's like Sato Tamo Gano, these things are dangerous. It's like a horse, You need to learn to ride the horse, and it can do you lots of good. But if you don't know how to ride the horse, you can fall off and break your neck. So that's a different concept, I think, than just getting rid of everything and then just, Otherwise, I think in some senses, Nanak wouldn't have had anything to tell, because the Buddhists had perfected their methods, the yogis had perfected their methods, the Siddhas had perfected their methods. So, it's a real challenge to distinct. But you're right, it's a thin, some of these things are like nuanced. Anji. Yeah, Bal wants to say something. Yeah. Let's just get it on the mic, Bal, then we can get the questioners. You just, yeah.
So I believe Professor Puran Singh had travelled to the east and actually did start following Buddhism for some time and looked into some of these things, and then returned to Punjab and became Sikh again, right? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is really important point, Bal. In some senses, Professor Puran Singh lost faith, and because he felt that Sikhi was just emulating what Vedanta was doing, or some of these other ideologies. Yeah, and in some sense, if you think about how some of those Western scholars caricaturized Sikhi, they characterized it as some amalgam between Islam and Hinduism. You read it in the books now. The Sikhis are kind of a bit of this and a bit of that. And so because he was looking he was also like he learned many languages. He was an engineer, he was a scientist, a philosopher. He's constantly questioning, and he found that what was happening in Europe was, all the action was in Europe, in terms of secularization, in terms of new ways of thinking about society. And he was drawn to people like Hegel and others because they were trying to bridge this gap between the spiritual and the physical. So he was drawn into that. But then he realized, and Bhai Veer Singh, a very important writer in Sikhi, his poetry is all about love, it's all about pyar, it's all about the subjective. He brought Puran Singh back to say, well, Sikhi goes beyond that, It's not an emptying. Love isn't empty, is it? When you have love with somebody, it's not empty. It's full of all kinds of things, full of joy. And I think that's the kind of Sikhi that brought him back. And maybe the theologian probably knows more about Puran Singh and some of the others. It might be incorrect, but he's obviously written. I mean, it's quite difficult to read. That's partly because he was so well read. He's one of few Sikh scholars who actually understood the European Enlightenment. So it's important to read his work to develop a Sikh perspective on the European Enlightenment. Anybody else? Yes, Sadip Pen. Yeah. Get the mic down there.
I was just simply going to ask, what is the advice for living in the moment then? I'm an early years teacher, and it comes really natural to the children. Yeah. We as adults are tapping into what they're doing in the moment. So what's the advice for us?
Okay, well, I'm not going to advise you, but I can take something from Gurbani. Yeah. There's a shabd line in Gurbani. It says, Sarvani suniya, Sarvani hunde, from your ears. Listen, rasna gaiye, sing with your tongue. The hirde te aiye. So hirde hunda your inner being. So it's saying, sing, listen, and then listen to what you're singing, and then take that inside yourself, which is quite different from sitting in quietness, which is what mindfulness tends to do. So I would say, get your young people to, and I don't think you necessarily have to listen to Gurbani. That's our vaste, but you can listen to the sounds of nature. I don't know about you, but if you ever go into the countryside, just for a moment you start hearing. You start listening properly. So I would say get them to be in contact with the environment. And of course, Gurbani is full of metaphors of the environment, of nature. It's even Rabada na ki dita hari. So actually, the gurus themselves also were living their lives within nature, and there's lots of examples of them like doing environmental work. So I would say connecting with nature itself is a way of getting to that moment of that timelessness. Because there's something timeless, isn't it, about sitting in a garden, listening to the sounds, seeing the butterflies, and not worrying about your iPhone or your social media or what's on TV. So get them to escape those things, but not to an empty space, but to a space of joy. All right? That's what I would say. Anybody else? Okay, should we call it a day then? Yeah, one more. Okay, at the back. Hanji pen.
Mine is not a question, but it's just a comment. And I was very interested in the comment that you made about asking questions, questioning, searching for knowledge, which I feel, don't do enough of. And one of the things while you were speaking that came to mind was, I think it's a Sufi kalam. ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਬਾਹਰ ਢੂੰਡਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਅੰਦਰ ਕੌਣ ਵਸਿਆ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਅੰਦਰ ਢੂੰਡਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਕਿਹਦੀ ਮਾਇਆ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਬਾਬਾ ਬੁੱਲੇ ਸ਼ਾਹ ਦਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਖਿਆਲ ਹੈਗਾ ਇਹ
I don't know that much, I'm not that knowledgeable, but ਅੰਦਰ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਆ ਬਾਹਰ ਵੀ ਤੂੰ ਆ ਹਰ ਥਾਂ ਤੂੰ ਹੀ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਆਉਣਾ
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ
ਪਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ
ਇਹਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਵਾਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਇਹ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਨਾ ਓਕੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ the Jewish faith, one of their principles is question everything. I don't know if you know that, but that's one of their pillars of ਜਿਹਦਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਵੰਡ ਛਕਣਾ ਕਿਰਤ ਕਰਨੀ ਨਾਮ ਜਪਣਾ one of the pillars of their faith is question everything. And you know, the Jews have all kinds of different beliefs. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਫੀ they're all over the place, but ਉਹ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ because ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ questioning ਇੱਕ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਅਪਣਾ ਲਿਆ. In fact, if you think about it, ਕਿੰਨਾ ਪੁਰਾਣਾ Jewish faith, it's over 2,000 years old. So it's that ability to question, I think, that's allowed them to keep going. So
it's more like 5,000 if it starts with Abraham.
If you go back, yeah. But the important thing is this, Guru talks about this as well, but he says there's a distinction between questioning for learning and questioning to express ego. एक टीचर करनी होंदी है ना and Guru बाणी च कहंदे खोजी उपजे बादी बिनसे. So as he खोजी बनना, we're going to become explorers, anthropologists, investigators, not as politicians ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੈਂਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. And we've seen what Boris Johnson and his idiotic badi behaviors done it. They ended up destroying people's lives. So khoji banna, we're going to become scientists. I find scientists the most humble people going. They can get some great results for an experiment, but they'll still say, I'm not sure about this, I have to do some more tests. Sadeh, we don't even test somebody, ਫਲਾਣੇ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਲਓ ਤਾਂ ਜੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਭਾਈ ਇਹਦੇ ਮਗਰ ਨਾਲ ਲੱਗੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਲਓ ਉਹ ਤੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨਦਾ. ਸੋ what we've done is ਅਸੀਂ ਪੁੱਠਾ ਕਰਤਾ ਕੰਮ. ਅਸੀਂ ਬੈਂਚ ਨਾ ਸਹੀ ਰੱਖ ਲਿਆ ਤਾਂ ਖੋਜ ਕਰਨਾ ਗਲਤ ਰੱਖ ਲਿਆ. ਸੋ ਚਲੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ we're all struggling, ਨਾ, but you're right. And actually, how many gurdwaras have these kind of sessions? ਇਹ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਸਥਾਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹ ਇਸੇ ਕੰਮ ਦੇ ਸੀ. ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਆਪ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਵਿਚਾਰਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ, ਗੋਸ਼ਟੀਆਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਗੋਸ਼ਟੀ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਵਿਧੀ ਗਵਾਚ ਗਈ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਲਿਆਉਣੀ ਆ. ਇਟਸ ਆਵਰ ਰਿਸਪੌਂਸਿਬਿਲਿਟੀ. ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਅੱਜ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾ ਕਈ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰਕ ਦਾਅਵੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ. ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦਾਅਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਨਾ ਫਿਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹਿਸ ਹੋਣੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਲੋਕ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਤੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਸੱਚ ਬੋਲ ਸਕਦਾ. ਆਪਾਂ ਦਾਅਵੇ ਨਾ ਕਰੀਏ. ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ. ਚਲੋ ਜੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਦਿਓ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਫਿਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਸੱਚ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ ਸੱਚ ਆ. ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ
ਜਿਵੇਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਜੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਕਈ ਕੁਝ ਕਲੇਮ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਘੱਟ ਆ ਸਾਇੰਟਿਸਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਇੰਨਾ ਦਾਵਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਉਹ ਸਿਰਫ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪਏ ਇੰਨੀ ਕੁ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਆਹ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਕੁਐਸਚਨਿੰਗ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਫਰਦਰ ਐਕਸਪੈਰੀਮੈਂਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਵੈਸੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਦੇਖੋ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਡੇਰੇਦਾਰ ਆ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਬਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਮਗਰ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਓ ਰੱਬ ਨੂੰ ਸਿੱਧਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਾ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਰਿਲੀਜਨ ਸਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਡੇਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ ਇੱਕ ਇੱਥੇ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਬੰਦਾ ਸੁਣਿਆ ਸੀ ਆਇਆ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਮੇਰੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੋਈ ਆ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਰੱਬ ਦਿਖਾ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਚਲੇ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਦੇਖ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਬਲੀਵਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਆ ਜਾ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਦਿਖਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਉਹਨੇ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੂੰਹ ਅੱਡ ਉਹਨੇ ਜੀਭ ਉਹਦੀ ਮਰੋੜ ਕੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਤਾਲੂਆਂ ਲਾਤੇ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਹ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਹਟ ਗਿਆ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਦੱਸ ਰੱਬ ਦਿਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹ ਵਿਚਾਰਾ ਬਚਣ ਦੀ ਖਾਤਰ ਬਸ ਦਿਸ ਪਿਆ ਫਿਰ ਏਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਹੋ ਬੰਦੇ ਆ
ਹਾਂ ਬਸ
ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਬੰਦੇ ਦਾ ਚਾਲ ਚੱਲਣ ਕੀ ਆ ਔਰ ਕਈ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਠੀਕ ਲੱਗਦੀਆਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਸੀ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਕਥਾ ਕਰਦਾ ਉਹ ਹੁਣ ਕਥਾ ਕੋਈ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਕੋਈ ਛੇੜੀਆਂ ਅਗੇ ਜੀ ਅਭਮਨੂ ਹਾਲੇ ਗਰਭ 'ਚ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਅਰਜਨ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਦ੍ਰੋਪਦੀ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਰਿਹਾ ਜੀ ਵੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਪੈਂਟਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ 'ਚੋਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਅੰਦਰ ਜਾ ਸਕੀਦਾ ਉਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹ ਦੱਸਣ ਲੱਗਾ ਵੀ ਬਾਹਰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਨਿਕਲੀਦਾ ਉਦੋਂ ਸੌਂ ਗਈ ਅਭਮਨੂ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਦਾ ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਾ ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹ ਅਭਮਨੂ ਅੰਦਰ ਚਲੇ ਗਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਦੇ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਿਆ ਉੱਥੇ ਮਾਰਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਿਰ ਬਜਲੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਰਹਿ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਿ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਪਿਆਰ ਪ੍ਰੇਮ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਬੱਚਾ ਜੰਮਦਾ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਲੈਂਗੁਏਜ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਬੋਲੀ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਕੋਈ ਬੋਲੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੁਣ ਅਰਜਨ ਕੀ ਪਤਾ ਕਿਹੜੀ ਬੋਲੀ ਉਹ ਸੰਸਕ੍ਰਿਤ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਉਹ ਸੰਸਕ੍ਰਿਤ ਬੋਲਦਾ ਹੋਊ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਡੂੰਘੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਮਝੇ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪਤਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਦਾਇਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਆ ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦਾਸ ਵਰਗੀਆਂ ਲਿਖਤਾਂ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਕਲੇਮ ਨੇ ਸੋ ਕਲੇਮ ਜ਼ਿਆਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਬੰਦੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਇੰਸਦਾਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਉਹ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕਰਦਾ ਉਨਾ ਹੀ ਕਲੇਮ ਘੱਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਕੋ ਰਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਇਸ ਗੱਲੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਖੂਬੀ ਆ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦਾ ਜੋ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦਾ ਆਸ਼ਾ ਸਾਇੰਸ ਸਿਖਾਲਣੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੇਕਿਨ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੱਚਾਈ ਕਈ ਲਿਖੀ ਆ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਆਪਰੇਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਦਰਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਿਲੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਾਉਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਮਝਾਇਆ ਹੈ ਭਈ ਕੋਈ ਰਾਖਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੂਰਜ ਨੂੰ ਫੜਿਆ ਆ ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਦੀ ਚਾਲ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਗ੍ਰਹਿਣ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸੋ ਸਤਿਗੁਰਾਂ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਰਸਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਪੈਸੀ ਪਏ
ਤਲਵੰਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਮਾਪਤੀ ਵੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਇਹ 'ਚ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਧਰਮ ਆ ਜਿਹਦਾ ਵੇਦ ਆ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਚਾਰੇ ਵੇਦ ਹੋਏ ਸਚਿਆਰ ਪੜ੍ਹੇ ਗੁਣੇ ਤਿੰਨ ਚਾਰ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਸੱਚ ਹੁਣ ਸੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਲ ਆ ਸੱਚ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਕਿਤੇ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ ਹੁਣ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੇ ਮਨ ਯੂ ਕੈਨ ਥਿੰਕ ਆਫ ਅ ਥਾਟ ਇਟ ਕੁਡ ਬੀ ਅ ਗੁੱਡ ਥਾਟ ਅ ਕਰੈਕਟ ਥਾਟ doesn't mean that somebody at some other moment in some other place can't have that thought as well. It can. But the important thing is that they will manifest that in a different way to you because their language is different, their culture is different. And that's why if we take the Bani that the Gurus have given us, they're using certain languages in certain moments in time. Not all the Gurus use the same language, it varies. Some use Persian, some Sanskrit mix, yeah? But it's in poetic form. And the poetry in the timeless in there. This is the important point. Poetry timeless in there. But to appreciate that, you have to take that into the moment. You can't say, well, 5000 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦੇ 2000 ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਰਹਿਣਾ ਹੁਣ ਇਹੀ ਰਹਿਣੀ ਬਹਿਣੀ ਹੋਣੀ ਸਾਡੀ
ਚੇਂਜ ਤਾਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤਾਂ ਚੇਂਜ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ
ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ ਚੇਂਜ
ਮਾਇਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੀ ਇੰਟਰਸਟਿੰਗ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਸੀਗੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤ੍ਰੈ ਗੁਣੀ ਮਾਇਆ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਦਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਇਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਦਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਹੁਣ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਵੇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੇਦਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਨਾਮ ਉੱਤਮ ਸੋ ਸੁਣੈ ਨਾਹੀਂ ਫਿਰੈਂ ਜਿਉਂ ਬੇਤਾਲਿਆ, ਉਹਦਾ ਭਾਵ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਵੇਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਉੱਤਮ ਕਿਹਾ ਆ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਹ ਪੰਡਿਤ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਆ, ਨਹੀਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ, ਵੇਦ ਡਿਫਰੈਂਟ। ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਚ ਝਗੜਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਣਾ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ 'ਚ ਐਸੈਂਸ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਨਾ। ਸੋ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਧਾਰਮਿਕ ਪੁਸਤਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਪਰਮਾਤਮਾ ਨਾਲ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜੁੜਨਾ। ਬਾਕੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਨਾ ਬਈ ਉਹ ਫॉर द ਮੋਮੈਂਟ ਹੋਰ ਇਹ ਕੁਆਇਟ ਕੰਪਲੈਕਸ ਹੈ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਲਈ। ਫਿਊਚਰ ਹਾਲੇ ਆਇਆ ਨਹੀਂਗਾ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਵੀ ਕੈਨ ਇਨਫਲੂਐਂਸ ਦ ਫਿਊਚਰ, ਹਾਊ ਵੀ ਯੂਜ਼ ਆਰ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਮੋਮੈਂਟ। ਜੇ ਫਿਊਚਰ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਫਲੂਐਂਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋਰ, ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਜੋ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹਦਾ ਇਫੈਕਟ ਆਪਣੇ ਫਿਊਚਰ ਤੇ ਪੈਂਦਾ। ਸੋ ਵੀ ਕੈਨ ਹੈਵ ਐਨ ਇਨਫਲੂਐਂਸ। ਪਾਸਟ ਤਾਂ ਜੋ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਉਹ ਪਾਸਟ ਇੱਕ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹ ਆਪਣੀ ਮੈਮਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਿਜ਼ੀਕਲੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੋਊਗਾ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਯੂ ਕੈਨ ਰਿਮੈਂਬਰ what you did. So in a way the past exists, but it's just in your memory.
In your head.
So ਇਹ ਬਜੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਡੀਪ ਕਨਸੈਪਟਸ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਮਤਲਬ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ।
I mean, I think again, for me, they're important concepts, and to really to do justice to that question, we need to then go away and research that and then give a proper response, है ना? And this is ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀ ਆ, ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਭਾਈ ਆ। We ask them all these difficult questions. ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੋ ਪੈਸੇ ਕਮਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਪ ਛੁਟਕਾਰਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, and they don't believe half the things they say themselves. ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਯਾਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੋਂ ਪੌਂਡ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦਾ ਜੇ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਤੇ। So let's not replicate that, and let's do things properly. And I mean, I looked at this on the timelessness, and actually I'm less certain about what I understand about timelessness now than I did when at the beginning.
ਇਹ ਲੈਵਲ ਥਿੰਕਰ ਹੁਣ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਨਾ ਭਈ ਦੇਹੀ ਮਾਟੀ ਬੋਲਾ ਪੌਣ ਬੁਝਰੇ ਗਿਆਨੀ ਮੂਆ ਕੌਣ, ਮਰਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂਗਾ, ਚੇਂਜ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ। ਇਨ ਟਾਈਮ ਥਿੰਗਸ ਚੇਂਜ, ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਦਾ ਅਸਰ ਆ। As time passes, there's real time and there's a watch time. This is artificial time. The real time we're talking about. ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਜਿਹਦਾ it's just changes. So actually ਮਰਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਵੀ। ਤੇ ਆਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰੀਰ ਆ ਇਹਨੇ ਐਲੀਮੈਂਟਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਣਾ। ਆਤਮਾ ਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਮਰਦੀ, ਮਨ ਆਤਮਾ ਦਾ ਇਮੇਜ ਆ। ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗੇੜ ਆ ਆਉਣ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਚੋਂ ਮੁਕਤੀ, ਇਹ ਮਾਇਆ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਚੋਂ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਮੁਕਤੀ।
Okay, ਆਪਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਮਾਪਤੀ ਕਰ ਲਈ, 8 ਵੱਜ ਗਏ ਤਾਂ। So next week we'll be looking at the concept of hukam, really important concept. It's mind-blowing actually. So hopefully you can come and bring others as well, and let's share. And you, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।